say anything other like fuck all of you. I hate my community. I am an introvert.
Just start singing Mr. Girls songs that got him banned.
Oh God, I fucking hate that guy.
I do not have an opinion. I've never spoken to him, never watched any of his videos, so I have no opinion.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. There's no need to get into all of that just yet. The thing I just don't get is like people that are like, you hate him, but he's such a good person. How could you possibly hate him? And I'm like, like the amount of people, if you just like, oh, fuck that guy, that are like, what? I'm just like, how do you not get that? Like, he's obviously controversial. Like,
I know nothing. Oh, the ready button is now blue. Let's click the ready button and see what happens.
3, 2, 1.
All right.
Okay, yeah, that looks a little cleaner. I can deal with that. Yeah, that's much better.
All right, cool. Might as well jump right in. So, free market versus single payer. What's your position?
Hold on one second. Yeah, well, as an anarcho-capitalist, obviously I would support free market healthcare. Single payer I would find to be demonstrably evil as well as inefficient.
Why is that when the countries that have the best healthcare are all like single payer?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an interesting way of putting it. First of all, I would say American healthcare is better than those, even by a consequentialist analysis. And second of all, I would say...
Well, what do you mean by, just to ask a question about that? Because it seems like when we look at all the data, life expectancy is
cheaper, better life expectancy, better outcomes, less waiting times. But if you actually just like look at the data with like a mind towards science, like it's provably better by almost every metric.
Well, America's like 30th for all of those.
I'll make the other point, right?
Sure.
Which is that I would say that if you're talking about better as in moral systems, right? Obviously, definitionally, free market healthcare must be better because it doesn't have the same rights violations that are baked into a socialist or single payer healthcare system, right? So I would say morally it has to be better just by definition. But even if we were to take morally it has to be better by definition.
The thing before that, why it's morally better.
Well, because it has things baked into it, such as taxation and theft and immoral things that are not morally justifiable. And so if it's not morally justifiable, right, and that's baked into the system, by definition, it has to be less ethical and not better.
Well, the taxation, I agree. But are you saying taxation is theft in this case? Because if taxation is consensual, then it's not theft. Like if you consent to being a part of a country that has taxation under the premise of using it to help people with stuff, then that wouldn't actually be non-consensual.
Yeah, I would make a caveat, right? Which is if you were a part of a covenant community where you voluntaristically signed up to a form of governance that included like a stipend of all transactions that was a tax, right? But it was a voluntary tax of every adult within the community, and they all agreed to that system, and they kind of collectively chose to set up this single payer healthcare system that like, yeah, that wouldn't have those rights violations baked into it. And then we could have a discussion about collectively and outcomes there. The problem is that like, that's a very limit case theoretical, right? That isn't necessarily like what we colloquially mean.
But that's why you said it baked in. It's not baked into the system that it must inherently be non-consensual. That's the only.
You're right. Technically speaking, it's only baked in if the single payer healthcare system is provided by a state, which would be all of the examples that you could probably reference at this point, with maybe some relatively few examples.
Well, if a state provides it, and again, the state is consensually a part of, people are consensually agreeing to be a part of the state, then it wouldn't be. So I don't think it's fair to say that it's baked into the system of single payer healthcare that it must inherently be immoral. It seems to be like a secondary issue that if there's a state which does impose taxes non-consensually, then by extension it would be, but I don't think that's baked into single payer healthcare.
I would say that the state is by definition non-consensual, right? So maybe we're working with different terms. What I would say is that a state is non-voluntary. And that's the difference between self-governance or a government or a covenant community, is that the state is is imposing public property, is imposing its will upon you, and is stealing from you. You're not voluntarily paying your taxes in a state. But if you were in a covenant community, right, that system of governance that you contractually agreed to wouldn't be a state, because it's not doing all of the things that makes a state a state.
Okay, so that's more of like a how you define state issue. But
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify. Yeah.
gotcha. So, but the United States is 46 on life expectancy. Why do you think that? And it's like 46 on like pretty much every metric in healthcare. So why do you think that it's better than the others that are literally higher on every rating?
Yeah, well, one of the things is you're not comparing like terms, right? So you're comparing a different country with different demographics and different culture and different diet and different foods, different economy, right? And then saying, well, America, because it's ranked 46, this is evidence of the inadequacies of the healthcare. And that's just like not epistemologically like sound. Like that's just bad science.
How? I'm not following. So like if we look
Well,
at
like for example, right? We can America is 46, right? But it jumps way up into like the low 20s, right? The moment you just compare white people in America to other white people, right? So once you take a certain demographic, that ranking changes demographically, which shows that it's not the healthcare system as a whole, but that there are a lot of other factors in health outcomes, which just shows that you making that comparison is just bad science. It's bad data.
so I'm not at all following exactly what you're saying there, because I agree if we put in poor people, they're less healthy because they don't have healthcare. But if we put in poor people of countries that have single payer healthcare, they do have healthcare, so they're more healthy, which is why the numbers are higher for those countries because the poor people have healthcare.
Yeah, but you're just saying immediately that like minorities, by virtue of having lower socioeconomic status in general, excluding Asians, of course, and like Jews, but like other minorities, right? That
And
because they
immigrants
tend
from
to have
Africa,
lower
yeah.
socioeconomic. Well, yeah, sure. I mean, yes. That's still not controlling for everything. What I'm saying though, right, is that you can take data and all of a sudden that changes. The problem, the core issue here is the same, which is that you're not comparing like variables. You're not comparing in America with the American culture and all things being equal, right, to an America that is free market, which we don't have here, obviously, right? We have a lot of socialist
Well, right. So,
interventions
but
in our
that's a separate
healthcare
issue
system.
because you said that America's system was better, even given that America's system isn't a free
Yes,
market. You think it's closer or
yes,
something.
yeah, I
So,
think it's better on average.
right. So my comparison here is that the whole point of single payer is that everybody gets healthcare. The poor people, the rich people, they all get healthcare.
Mhm.
And in the free market,
Yes.
that does not happen. There are poor people who don't get healthcare because they can't afford it. Like if I
Well,
go to
that's
the
not
ER,
true. That's not true.
well, it's true in America.
Depends. No, it's not true. It depends on what you define as health care, right? So define
MRIs.
your term, right? Right.
Well, I
Like,
mean, like
what do you
healthcare
mean?
means like
Like,
if I break my arm and go to the ER and get it treated, am I going to go into debt?
pay money?
Yeah, go into debt. Like have to be able to like lose all of my income and pay it back. Like if I go to the UK, I pay nothing. I pay a $9
Mhm.
bill. I'm done. Nobody goes into debt.
Right.
Nobody in America, nobody in the country, maybe like a kid is going to go into debt for breaking their arm and going to the ER in a single payer healthcare system. In America,
Right. So your definition of healthcare, right, is that you can go to the hospital and you don't have to pay a significant portion of money that isn't currently in your bank account. That's your definition of healthcare. Because that's a weird definition of healthcare. Seems like you're just pivoting to not admit the fact that we do have healthcare for everybody. It's just not provided by the state.
well, yeah. So healthcare, I mean, is like the number of people who can utilize the resources of doctors in order to avail their ailments of health.
So like, we're not worried about quality of care or anything like that, right? Like just there's a certain baseline of quality of care that one must meet without going in debt, and that's the definition of healthcare. Realize like how this is a weird way to define
Good
healthcare.
healthcare. So I'd say like good healthcare would be the ability for the most people to have the most care at the lowest price. Something like that.
So so you want to say like what you want now is good healthcare, and your definition of good healthcare is the most people. So the standard deviation, right? The people sitting in the middle of the standard deviation, what is their quality of care, as well as adding in the metric of how many of the entire population has access to a level of care that meets the middle of the standard deviation.
Well, no, most would mean everyone. So the best system would have literally everyone. So most, the most in that sentence doesn't mean the median. It means that if we have compare two systems and one system helps more people than another, all else being equal, that the system who helps more is better. So the most isn't saying a median
Okay.
equilibrium.
So we don't care about quality of care so long as it meets some arbitrary level of care. What we're talking about is that the most amount of people or per capita have whatever that arbitrary line of healthcare is.
No, that's why I said all else being equal. That part there was covering the quality. So if quality is the exact same of the two systems and one system helps
Right.
one extra person, it's by definition better. So the word most there, all it's doing is making a comparison of the number, all else being equal, that if this system helps an extra person.
I would actually agree with you with one caveat, which is that neither system violate rights. If one violates rights and one doesn't, then right, and the one that violates rights is better in terms of outcomes or quality, I don't care because it's violating rights, right? It's not morally justified, so it can't be better.
I don't. So let's say we're in a Nazi state or a prison state, and everyone's a prisoner, and the healthcare system provides exactly the same health benefits as whatever the best healthcare system in the world is, and it provides it to more people. I would count that as a better healthcare system than the free one that provides it to less people. So even if you're a slave given the system, the socioeconomic system or whatever, you're literally a slave. The healthcare system is doing its job great. The healthcare system is succeeding independent of whatever else the government is doing badly.
So you're saying, for example, you believe that like the Southern Confederacy had a better healthcare system than like the North, where slaves were free.
I don't think that's true, but if it was the case that in the Southern they had better healthcare and the slaves had longer life expectancy, and
Yes,
if that was the case, I don't really know the data on that. If
that's the King Cotton. You're an American, right?
Yes.
So you've like read the King Cotton speech,
No.
like the justification for slavery. One of the big speeches, right? That was the justification for maintaining slavery in the South was that in the North, black people get injured on the job. They're not taken care of. They don't have the same positive rights, essentially, right? And in the South, they're taken care of even when they're old, that they're able to like raise their children, that they have better health outcomes, they have better life expectancy, etc. So the argument was we should maintain the institution of slavery because it had better consequentialist outcomes for those black people, and that proved that they were actually compassionate. So you would be arguing that the South had a better healthcare system. And I would say no, because it can have better outcomes in terms of life measurable things that you're measuring, but that it is morally unjustified to enslave people, and that that's baked into the quote unquote healthcare system of the Confederacy.
No, those are two completely separate things. Like you can still offer the healthcare without enslaving people. Like there's no contradiction there. So the fact that one government enslaves people and they offer better healthcare, do they offer better healthcare? Well, yes, they do, but they also enslave people, and we should end that part. But the healthcare system is great. We should probably do something similar to the healthcare system. Just omit the slavery part. Like it's not required that you have slaves and do healthcare.
Right. But my argument is hinging upon the fact that the two are connected, right? Obviously, the better healthcare is connected to the enslavement of the slaves in the South. That is why that healthcare system exists. And if you're talking about single payer healthcare under that of a state, that enslavement of taxation, and the enslavement of its population is inherent to the system.
I think you're bringing up way too many points here. The point we're addressing is how do you define well, no, that's a separate point. The point we were starting on is how do you define a better healthcare system? That's what we were talking about. So how do I define a better healthcare system? Provides equal care for more people, lower price or equal price, whatever.
Oh, like, okay. I'll define how I would define good, better, best, right? Situation like on a continuum of healthcare, right? Would be first, it cannot be good and it cannot be better if it is morally unjustifiable. And then second, what would be better, assuming both systems are morally justifiable, would be the one that matches my individual values and goals as a rational being. What can I utilize myself as an individual to get better outcomes for me? And what is it that I value? And I particularly value a healthy and happy society that has good workers and good families and good outcomes and all of those things. And those are great things to look at in terms of what I value, and that would be better. But first and foremost, it must be morally justifiable, or it already it already is an immoral system that is bad, and so it can't be better if it bakes in more rights violations.
Okay, so to try and simplify that, you're saying that a better healthcare system is one that does all the things I said, but also doesn't violate rights or something like that.
Well, I mean, not necessarily does all the things that you said, but like in terms of like outcomes, it depends on what your individual values and goals are.
Well, so just clear, healthcare by definition means health. We want to know the well-being of the individual to some degree. That's like has to be in the definition of healthcare. Probably, you wouldn't just define healthcare as a potato, right? It's got to be like something to do with
Yeah.
the life of the individual people under the system, and it being better in some way related to the efficiency of their bodies working, right?
Well, no, I mean, health, like I'm an individualist, right? So I wouldn't necessarily define healthcare by its consequentialist outcomes for the good of society. What I would say is what is good healthcare system is what is morally justified and works for you and your health. That is what is good. That is what is moral. I don't like,
Okay,
why would I
so
concern myself with the outcomes for others unless it is that I individually value those things, which I happen to do.
So let's assume that the vast majority of people want to live and healthfully.
Mm-hmm.
A system that does more of that is better.
Presuming it doesn't violate rights.
Okay, and so a healthcare system that causes people to live healthier and violates rights, is it's a worse healthcare system?
Yes.
It doesn't make sense.
It makes perfect sense because better implies a moral argument.
No, like if I ask who's the better basketball player, there's no moral arguments. It's literally a factual statement, like Michael Jordan wins.
But it can't. Right, but it can't. But if one of them is a cheater, right, then by definition they're not better because by negation we have shown them to be immoral in their skills.
In the context of healthcare, when we're asking about better, we're asking about the functioning of the body and mind, essentially. And so, if it maximizes the function of the body and the mind, I don't think there's any way to cheat on that. Is whatever way it does that is a better healthcare system. I don't care if it cheats.
Socialized healthcare is cheating, right?
No,
because it's stealing resources and then providing things and then saying, oh, look at all these things I provide.
Well, no. So in the case of basketball, like in the case of basketball, cheating means you're not a good basketball player. You're literally breaking the rules of basketball, right? But in the case of healthcare, the goal is to maximize the health of the individual. It doesn't matter what, like if you just, I don't know, punch babies, but maximize the healthcare of everybody, you're not cheating because you're doing the thing you've said to do, which the rules of the game.
You're not cheating, but you're violating rights.
Right. And so in the case of, again, healthcare, what makes a good healthcare system seems to have nothing to do with rights. Like we don't care about rights. What we want is which system helps the most people to have the longest, best functioning body minds. And that's it. That's all you need to say. Like, even if it's evil, even if there's an evil healthcare system, it's still a better healthcare.
I'm with you. Your last clarification makes it make sense, right? Which is that your last clarification says, I'm talking about which performs at a higher rate of these specific measures that I'm looking at, right?
Yes.
And that's a different conversation than saying who's the better basketball player or what's the better system. Because when you leave it open like that, morality must play as a part of that question. But when you say what achieves better outcomes specifically, right? And then we're looking specifically at those outcomes, right? You've taken morality out of the question. It's the problem is with the vagueness of better in our colloquial language.
Yeah, that's fair. Totally. So I think that what's important when we're assessing from a government's perspective, which system of healthcare to adopt is better, as in
Mhm.
statistical data, and moral is just irrelevant to the question. I think in order to ask the moral question, we just ask which is the more moral system. That would be, we specifically say moral. Better, usually in the context of politics, is pragmatism, based on what works, not moral. Most things the government do isn't moral, but it's when they say what should we do.
Yeah, but you're talking to a crazy old Ancap, right? And we tend to be pretty principled on what we think is moral and immoral here. And so I would never make the claim vaguely and openly that a system is better that has baked into it rights violations. I would say definitionally it can't be. But if you're specifically targeting like which of these two systems, comparing them together, all other things being equal, produces, let's say, a higher life expectancy, like that's just a statement of fact about
Yeah.
which has a higher life expectancy,
Yeah.
right? And so then we can quarrel over those two systems,
Right.
and try and figure out what that fact is.
I would argue that the vast majority of people, when they ask which is the better healthcare system, mean it in that way, the numbers way, not that moral way, because it's more quantifiable. There's a hard data regarding that one, and morality
Yeah,
is much more big. But
I would say that our society has kind of like indoctrinated a lot of people into consequentialist framework, and they kind of throw aside the moral question for statist pragmatist views regularly. I don't know that that's necessarily about whether or not whether or not their usage of the language is correct there.
right, it's not about which is correct. It's just usually in a conversation, you try to use the words that most correspond to what most people mean by the words in order to make things clear. So I think that there's good reason to do that too. I think that because there's hard data we can calculate on health, on like life expectancy and things, but whereas morality is pretty much based on whichever moral interpretation you have, and so that's much more subjective, and so it's not really a good basis to try and measure things on. But that's a separate topic. Just to go back to the main topic, by my definition of better, just the statistical data shows single payer does better than free market data.
Yeah, no, I just completely disagree.
Based on what you said? You said America was the best healthcare system in the world. It's 46th on the data.
One of the best. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's also 57% of all pharmacology advancements, right? So that's one metric, right? You say it's 46 on the data. Those are some metrics you're using. There's other metrics. See, this is the problem with consequentialism and utilitarianism. It's not justifiable as a form of normative ethics because you have to have perfect knowledge and you have a subjective bias in what you're focusing on because you as a human value certain things, right? We might value, for example, that a majority of all new medications are created in America for the entirety of the world. That might be a metric. How high do you value that? How low do you value that? Right? Like that's a difficult thing to do.
Well, I'm not seeing the relevance there. So even if, suppose we stopped all medical innovation whatsoever, then we look at the numbers, America's still lower. So
right. So let's say we do that, right? And then we run a Piagetian game through a consequentialist analysis. Eventually, that would be the worst thing for all people in all of the earth. Because if you stopped all medical innovations, right, and then you compared it to another place that didn't stop all medical innovations, right, all of the cures over time that would occur, all of the medical innovations that would make people's life expectancy better, their health better, all of those things, right, would, even by a consequentialist framework, be 100% better. So if you just say, well, let's take that out, you can't, right, because that's obviously part of the equation.
Okay, so the point here is to isolate variables, and when you say that America does most of the innovation stuff, like that's fine, but the question is how much does that affect the betterness of the healthcare system? That's what we're trying to figure out. So if we're comparing the betterness of the healthcare system between our country and other countries, and we have the most innovation, if we had no innovation, I imagine that the level of healthcare would still be proportionally about the same as it is now between America and the UK. The life expectancy is the same, cancer death rate is the same, infection rate and hospitalizations are the same.
It would probably get worse in America because the fact that we have so much medical innovation in America, not only does it make the world's healthcare better, obviously, right? It makes everyone's healthcare better.
But it makes everyone's healthcare better.
But if we weren't doing it, right, then it would be mostly Germany and Israel creating medications, right? And it would probably cost us more money in order to import things that we didn't patent, which would make our healthcare more expensive.
say
No, you're
all
trying to
innovation.
isolate variables,
No, no,
right?
no.
And then when you do that and you say, well, what are the consequences of that? And then I go through the consequences. You're like, no. Stop. Don't tell me the consequences of the action that I told you to tell me the consequences of
I
the
don't
action.
think you're understanding the question here. So the question here is: imagine we stopped all innovation everywhere on the entire planet, no innovation at all.
Right.
Now, supposedly, because we make innovations here in America, if we stop the innovations here in America, there would be a greater fall in the quality of healthcare than there would be in the other countries, because the other countries don't get as much of a benefit from our innovations, right? Because we prioritize ourselves, and so any innovations we give priority to us over them, right?
Presumably there would be some
Right.
fall in the outcome, the measurable outcomes of
Right.
the quality of healthcare in America if we do
So
that. But of course,
even
the world would be worse off.
right, absolutely, I agree with you 100%. But even though innovations are done in America, our healthcare is still worse than all of theirs, even though they benefit less from these innovations than we do, right?
I disagree. I disagree.
How?
Well, so there's a ton of, like, when you look at the data, right? You start looking into, like, let's say you look at one thing at a time, and you can see how the data is really done in such a way that is just bad science, right? So let's look at costs, for example, right? Average cost of healthcare, I think in America, last I checked, was like 14,400 something dollars per person, right?
Sounds
And
high.
then, like, in Canada, it's like 7,000. In the UK, it's like 7,500, right? And so for most industrialized nations, right, not looking at like India or anything, but like liberal democracies, something that you could say is closer to comparing like terms, it's somewhere between like 6,000 to like 10,000. So once you take the median, it looks like, oh, America's healthcare costs are like double that of everywhere else in the world. This is bad, right? And then you say this is one kind of point where it's bad. But the problem is that they're not comparing like terms. You can't compare socialized medicine prices to a more free market system's prices. Like, you just can't. It's a stupid thing to even compare in terms of metrics unless you just don't understand basic science.
Well, I don't understand your argument. So, because like the argument was is that even though they have better numbers on everything, life expectancy, less death rates, less infection rates, less,
Well, no,
uh,
they don't.
well, they do. Like, just to use the life
No, if you
expectancy,
compare like
America's. Well, let's
no, like
just
if you compare like American liberal democracy Jews to like Jews in other places under socialized healthcare, our outcome is better. If you compare white people to other white people in other European nations, our healthcare system is better. The problem is that we have large demographic issues, racial issues. We have economic. There's a multitude of variables, right? I mean, with 30,000 gun deaths a year, like there's all these other variables that don't get accounted. And instead, what you say is America ranks here, therefore healthcare bad. And that's just a bad way of looking at data.
okay. I'm not the gun argument is valid, but I'm not following like anything else you said there, because the argument here is that for a country, from the perspective
Mm-hmm.
of everyone in the country, all minorities, is healthcare system X better for everyone in the country than healthcare system Y? Saying that, oh, we don't compare the Jews to the Jews. I don't care. I want to know what's better for the country, for everyone in the
Mm.
country. And so
See,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh
Sorry.
yes. So I'm saying that if the life expectancy given this healthcare system for the average of the
Mm-hmm.
country is low versus a different healthcare system which has a very high average for a country, then from the perspective of the country, the healthcare system that provides the high average is better. It's like for the country, for everyone in the country. That one's
Yeah,
better.
yeah. That's just stupid because you're not comparing like terms. I mean, you're just wrong.
Everyone,
Like, it's
everyone,
just silly.
everyone in the country to everyone in the country. How are those not like terms?
Because they're different countries with different cultures, different economic systems, different tax structures, different diet. One of the major reasons we rank
We
so
can
low,
solve for that. We can solve for
that
that
is a
in
variable.
science. We've solved for that in science.
Yes, and when you compare like terms, they get closer and
No.
closer, and eventually America gets better healthcare.
So the way you filter
The
out
biggest one.
biases,
Mhm.
the way you filter out biases in science is that you accumulate a number of different biases from a number of different perspectives. So like comparing different countries with different crime rates, different racial demographics, different religious rates, whatever. If we see the same pattern given single payer healthcare systems versus more free market systems, if it's always the case that single payer systems do better regardless of any independent cultural variables, then single payer systems are better. That's we can solve for this because we can test this in multiple different situations.
That's not true, right? So first of all, there are plenty of metrics in which single payer healthcare systems are just worse, right? Wait times being like kind of the big one, right? They're like triple in Canada and the UK than they are in America.
Not really. No. So that data is false. That's only true for specialists, which will take up less than 10% of most medical visits, or less than 3%.
But things happen at the extremes, right? Like, like what? Yes, they do. Like more things, more cost happens at the extremes, more death happens at the extremes, etc.
No.
If you're needing to see us, what do you mean no?
Like, so specialists don't save more lives than cardiac surgeons. So no, specialists are not the primary people to save lives. They don't impact the majority of life.
But an oncologist does, right? Like if it takes you longer to get cancer screenings, and cancer is a big deal in terms of deaths, then that's an issue. That happens at the extreme. That's not like normal people just going to their yearly doctor checkup once a year, right?
Again, so
there's a bigger difference between like an oncologist and like going to your family physician once a year.
Right. And in Canada, the wait times for seeing a cancer doctor in big cities is like the same as America. It's only in rural areas that they don't have that because they're rural areas. So that's not actually a problem. If we compare the numbers there, like we say that the poor people in America can't see those doctors ever because they can't afford them.
That's not true.
What is? They literally can't afford them. That's the point. I mean,
that's not how the American healthcare system works.
To get an MRI in America is $3,000. People can't afford that. They can't go to the doctor to get diagnosed with cancer. Cancer treatment costs tens of thousands of dollars. They can't do that. So even though that's
not true. That's a false statement.
Which part of that was false?
You're saying something is impossible to do because they can't afford it. That's not true.
Okay.
Plenty of people go and get medical procedures and tests done that they can't afford.
Okay, so by impossible there, I didn't mean logically impossible. That was a generalization. So generalized impossible, they can't afford it. So if they could, or to rephrase that, if they could afford it, they would go, and then there would be wait times at those places too. So the reason there's no wait times in Oklahoma for cancer research is because the only people that go there are the people who are rich. The poor people don't go. If they have cancer, they just die.
That's not true.
It is.
That's not true. More people die in waiting lines in the UK and Canada than they do from lack of access to healthcare in America.
No.
Yes,
like
people
no.
People die from lack of the ability to go to a specialist and get the diagnoses that they need. In America, you can schedule an MRI and you don't have the money to do it. And this happens. This is one of the reasons why costs are so arbitrary. Are like this is one of the reasons why you're not comparing like terms, is because in America we have bankruptcy, right? So that's one of many factors, right? So plenty of people go and get procedures done that they can't afford, and they don't get turned away from the hospital because legally they can't if it's something that is an emergency, right? If you go to the doctor and he says, hey, I think you need to get a cancer screening, right? And you don't have the funds to do it, they can't tell you, oh, you can't get a cancer screening, even though you can't afford it. They can't turn you away for that because it's a life-threatening issue. So what you do is you go to the oncologist, you get the cancer screening, you can't afford it, and then this is what you do. You either negotiate with the hospital because their black book prices often are double the actual price that they're willing to take on these things, which is another factor that bloats the supposed healthcare budget, because it's very easy when you have a $10,000 hospital bill to call a hospital and say, all I've got is the ability to pay $5,000 over the next 16 months. Will you accept that? So first of all, that's one way it's overblown. The second is that we have bankruptcy procedures. So if medical bankruptcy is one of the most common forms of bankruptcy in America. It sucks. It's stressful. We could argue that the increased cortisol rates from the stress of having to deal with those situations might lead to worse healthcare outcomes. And we could have that discussion. But the fact of the matter is that to say it's impossible or that people don't go to these things is just not true.
No. So what I was saying was not true was when you said that more people die in Canadian wait lines than do from not getting treatment in America. That's false. 4 out of 10 adults in America forego medical treatment, which leads to very serious complications. In America, only 0.3% of people in rural Canada are in long waiting lines. It's just the data here is 40% of Americans
The average.
forego treatment. 0 point something percent of Canada's are in long wait lines.
You're not
Oh no.
again, you're playing this pivoting game where you're not comparing like variables, right? First,
your statement was
you're comparing anybody in a waiting line versus people that
That's
forego
you
some form of medical treatment.
you said these things. You said that the number of people who die in waiting lines is greater than the number of people who die from not getting treatment, right? That's what you
From
said.
lack of access to healthcare, but basically the same thing, right?
Right. So if someone
Mhm.
doesn't go to the doctor because they have a cough, find out it's cancer and then it's stage 4 and they die, that's because they didn't go to the doctor because they couldn't afford it, and it was cancer and they didn't know that, and they died because they didn't go to the doctor, right?
Mhm.
And that happens
Presumably in that specific instance, yes.
Yes, which happens a lot. In fact, I think what's his name, John Oliver and some more news guy did a video on this. This happens a lot in America. It does not happen a lot in Canada.
I wouldn't appeal to John Oliver for good data, bro. Come on.
He's got the
That's
sources.
fair.
I don't know. He's got academic sources on his sides. That's pretty good.
Okay. What we're talking about, right? What you're comparing is people that are currently as of right now in a long waiting line, right?
Yeah.
So not the percentage of people that have ever been in a long waiting line throughout 1 year, right? Versus the amount of people in America that didn't do something throughout a year, right? You're comparing right now, right? Versus what percentage of people have done a thing. So those are massively different numbers.
Wait,
First and foremost.
Just
Second of all, it doesn't.
Just to clarify, the number as I'm comparing here are number of people who die in Canada while in a waiting line, which shows that that's just in a year, right?
Okay. And you're comparing the number of people who die from lack of medical access to healthcare in America, you're claiming is 40%. That's your claim now? Because that's stupid.
No. This is just basic understanding of math. So if the waiting lines in Canada for that very small percent do cover the whole year. It's yearly, it's annual data. It's not like I don't know what your argument there is, that some people get out of the line.
I'm not going off of your source. I'm going off of what you stated, and what you stated was, and I'm not saying you're lying. I'm just saying you're not comparing like variables, which is you're still not comparing like variables.
What I'm not, you said the number of people who die while in a line is greater than the number of people who die who don't get treatment in America.
Yes. No, not people who, I said who die from lack of access to healthcare. So the reason they died, the specific reason that they died, is because they didn't go to the doctor, and their life would have been saved if they had gone to the doctor. This is very different than the number of people who choose not to go to the doctor because they're feeling under the weather. In fact, one of the things that's really interesting is that plenty of people, the cost of healthcare is prohibitive, right, for going to the doctor, right? And when you have socialized medicine, there's no incentive to not go to the doctor. And so one of the problems on the reverse side of that coin is that you have a bit of a cough or a flu, and then you go to the doctor every time.
Okay, so
when you don't actually need to do that.
Got the data. National Post, more than 2,000 patients in Canada died in whatever 2021, or that's where the thing was posted, while waiting for a doctor. So it's about 2,000. In America, more than 26,000 Americans die each year because of lack of medical health insurance, because they can't get treated. There's 10 times 2,000
more. What's the population in Canada?
I have no idea. Population of Canada.
So it's about yeah, right. So it's about 10% our population.
Okay.
Now, so what you're saying is it's slightly better in Canada that die in long waiting lines as opposed to in America, right? So now we're getting close.
Wait.
But also, said there were
more. No. Wait. You said there were more people who die in Canadian health lines than
in 2021. In 2021, do you know what the sixth leading cause of death is in Canada? In 2021?
I'm guessing it's wait lines.
No, it's medical assistance in death. And one of the big reasons that they tell
What?
people
Say that
to
again?
kill themselves, they incur medical assistance in death. It's MAID is the
That's
metric that they use. It's the number 6 cause of
euthanasia?
death in Canada.
Okay.
Basically, yeah. But I mean, it's voluntary, right? But one of the many things that a lot of those doctors are doing in 2021 is encouraging people, hey, you're going to have you're going to have long wait times. You're going to have issues with your healthcare. Our ability to take care of you is going to be diminished. We have a nursing shortage right now. You might just be happier killing yourself. They actually encourage people to do it. It's gotten so bad that there was like a recent kind of like controversial thing where they like encouraged a veteran to kill suicide because he had PTSD, even though he had a wife and kids, and stated that he had done it before, and they let him keep his job because they have such a bad shortage of nurses, so much so that they're actually hiring private nurses to fill their hospitals because they can't get people to work in the hospitals. But yeah, so they're having to go to the private sector and then pay them contracts to work in the hospital. But yeah, so the problem there is even if we compare like terms, now we get real close, and it looks like from 2021, it's slightly better in Canada's favor, right? Now that we're comparing like terms.
No.
But there is a multitude of variables here. One of them being that they're encouraging people not to sit on long wait lines and die from the shitty healthcare that they have, to just go ahead and kill themselves.
Oh, so your statement was that more people in Canada die in wait lines than people in America die from not receiving medical health care. I mean, 10 times more die in America. So your statement is just wrong, right?
Okay, if you don't want to compare per capita because America's 10 times the size of Canada in terms of population, then why are we even having this conversation?
So per capita, the proportions are still higher. More people in America die from lack of, because it's 26,000 something, whereas 2,000 in Canada. Canada is, it's not 10 times. It's actually a little less than 10 times, but we can go with 10 times, and you still get
it's like it's a little more than 9 times. It's a little more than 9 times.
Yeah.
Size. Yeah.
So in the case,
so I'm adding additional variables, which is that in Canada you have the option to kill yourself if you don't want to wait in the long waiting lines, and that's over 10,000 people that do that. Who knows what percentage that is?
I don't. Everyone has the option to kill themselves. That's Americans do that too.
Right.
Americans do that.
Let's add another variable.
I don't care. The point here is that if we,
I know that you don't care about being accurate about the data, but I'm going to make you care. Let's add another variable. In Canada, we have medical tourism to the United States. Did we not?
So
people that have money.
That's not my
people
point.
that have money travel to the United States so that they don't have to wait in those waiting lines. So at least some percentage of people are not dying in the waiting lines in Canada due to the fact that America has a more free market healthcare system.
No, America also has health tourism to Canada and Mexico, but that's irrelevant to the point. So like you keep bringing up irrelevant points that have nothing to do with anything I've said. So again, all I've said here is that the number of people who die in Canadian waiting lines is less, even per capita, than the number of people who die in America from lack of healthcare coverage. Now that's a very good
my claim
reason.
is that you're looking at the data as a sophist, trying to use it to win like a debate point, instead of actually looking at how complex this data is to actually understand why the data doesn't really support your conclusions. If you actually go through the data, look at the methodology, try and compare like terms, what you begin to see is that all of these like on the face, look at this scary number, look at America at 46, actually doesn't represent reality and what the issues are.
Actually, it's more likely is what's the case is that you're trying to cherry pick data to try and make it seem to yourself that this isn't the case when it is the case. So like anybody can look at data and try and find confounding variables that may in fact mess with the p-values. Literally no one in science cares. It doesn't matter. What is it? I'm
not p-hacking.
That's exactly that's literally what you're doing.
No, I'm not I'm not looking at a data and like changing the statistical significance of it.
That's exactly.
I'm adding additional variables
to change the significance of it. That's what p-hacking is. You don't. They're not like literally just saying, "Oh, I'm going to value this data more just because nothing." They add extra variables to change the weight of the variables. That's what p-hacking is. Literally, that's what you're doing. Literally. But so I mean,
you're trying to isolate variables so that you don't actually have to study reality.
No, I'm going to use the most available common data that has the most correlation to the actual thing to which we're talking about, which is usually given Pareto distributions, the one that's the most likely to be correct.
So because it's most supported by the medical community, that means it's the most likely to be correct. Is that what
No.
you're
So
saying? Like it's a popularity contest via the Pareto distribution because
no,
it's more citations. Like what are you arguing? I must have
Pareto
missed something.
distribution is the 80-20 rule that, like, of all of the variables you can look at, the vast majority, 20% of those variables are going to account for 80% of the causation of whatever's.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking. Sorry. Continue. I apologize.
Okay, so like Pareto distribution, the point there is about 20% of the variables you look at have an 80% disproportionate effect on whatever causal factors you're trying to discuss. And so if you look at just the most important 20 factors or whatever, that will give you the correct answer 80% of the time, a very high percent of the time. And you don't need to look at all of the other confounding variables, are just irrelevant. And so if we look at the high value targets here, what are the most important ones? Like life expectancy, number of people who die in waiting rooms, I guess, is one of the ones you picked up. We get
Mm-hmm.
to a very clear conclusion here that, yeah, healthcare works. Single payer healthcare works. It's literally raised the quality of life for millions, billions of people all over the world. And we can
Mm-hmm.
literally see the effects in numerous cultures, numerous environments of drug usage, violence, all over the world. We know it works in every one of these at a higher rate than chance, and the free market systems are just garbage everywhere, with a few really good exceptions like Singapore and Hong Kong, which did pretty well. But for the vast
Yeah.
majority of places, they're just garbage, complete
But
garbage.
to be fair, why did Hong Kong do well?
Uh, Lots of reasons.
Yeah. There's a lot of factors, right? Which
Right.
is, but according to you, we can ignore most factors.
So like
What are the big reasons why Hong Kong? Yeah.
Because they were surrounded by a communist nation that didn't have any free market trading, and since they were they monopolized all the free market access, most traders used Hong Kong as a hub for profit, and so pretty much all of the significant usages of trade went through Hong Kong, which made it significantly more successful because there was no competition nearby.
Right. So your argument is that the reason that Hong Kong did well is because it was a wealthy nation. Or
Because they had a
wealthy
monopoly on
city-state.
freedom. They had a monopoly on all free trade, because China, it does not have that. So because Hong Kong,
Right, but why we're not comparing China, right? Like we're comparing why Hong Kong as a more free market healthcare system did better than, let's say, some of the socialized medicines in Europe, right? So what was it that made Hong Kong special that their free market system worked and like America's, for example, is failing?
right, so that's because there was no other competition in the area. They got all of the wealth, and yes, the wealthierness made them successful.
Okay, so your argument is that it's the wealth. I would argue that it's an educated population that was healthier. That it might not even be the free market system of healthcare that made them do so well, but it was an educated and yes, more wealthy has some factors in that is certainly has factors in that as well. But they're a much healthier population than America.
They're better off in every respect because they're richer per capita by a significant portion. So like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It's like all of the factors, their education level, their healthcare level, their
Right.
awareness, their freedom, their psychological state, their lack of stress, all of those, because they're wealthy. Like if you're
Right.
in a
So
wealthy country, you get all those.
if we had a more wealthy demographic in America, our free market healthcare system would work better. Is that what you're
Yes.
saying?
Any demographic, if you have a
Probably.
more
Yeah,
wealthy
I
system,
would probably agree to that, which is why
it's not just
I'm for
for
liberty.
just to clarify, it's not just for free market systems. Literally any system, if the population is wealthier, it's going to do better.
Okay. So
So like,
you're saying if they would have had better healthcare outcomes in Hong Kong if they had a socialized healthcare system as opposed to a more free market.
probably, I think that is an argument I would most likely make, that if they had implemented a socialized healthcare system and given the same proportion of wealth prior to China's hostile takeover, then yes, they probably would have had even better healthcare results than
Mm.
with the privatized system.
Well, better. Make sure you're specific about what you mean by better because it would be more immoral and would be unjustifiable. But yeah, I get what you're saying in terms of specific measurable outcomes that you care about and not the ones that you want to dismiss.
Yeah, all of the people in Hong Kong would live longer and be happy to pay the money, and so it would be more moral too.
Okay. And why do you think it is that socialized medicine for the people of Hong Kong would be better than the system that they had?
Because of the advantages of socialized single payer. I'm not a socialist, just to clarify. Single payer are significantly better system overall.
Yeah, real quick. When we were doing emails, like it was I just kept saying socialized
Yeah.
healthcare, and so that's what I thought you were depending. But I mean, single payer is a form of socialized healthcare, just not the wider net of socialized healthcare.
Yeah, well, yeah, socialized in the general term, not socialized as in socialism. Separate things.
Well, I mean, I would call your typical Republican a socialist. So,
Okay,
and certainly I would call you a socialist.
I don't. You'd probably call 99.9% of people on the planet socialists, but that's what I
Probably,
mean.
yeah.
Socialized just
fine.
means socialized just means spread across a group. Like that's all it means. It's just divided amongst a group.
Yeah.
So
why do you think it would be better? Sorry for interrupting so much in terms of terms.
Fine.
I apologize. Please go.
Right. So if we had a socialized single payer system in Hong Kong, I think more people would have had more access to more healthcare and had better life expectancy and would have been happier about it. So they would have all been happier if they had paid for this. Because they lived longer.
Well, the question is why, not what is. You're saying it is a statement of fact that they would have. I asked you why. Why would it be better than the free market system? Like, what is it that is so special about the single payer healthcare system that makes the measurable kind of like consequentialist variables that we're choosing to focus on, which is general satisfaction with life survey plus healthcare outcomes to include whatever you want to conclude in your answer. It doesn't matter.
Sure. So I'd say that based on all the data we have, socialized healthcare systems do better in every measurable metric, rather compared to free market systems, including life expectancy, cancer rates, rates of hospitalization, rates of recovery from hospitalization, rates of infections from surgery. Every metric we can count on, socialized medicine does better. And so based on induction, if this system does better in every metric, we apply this system, then inductively they're likely would have had better outcomes in all of those metrics.
Right. But again, you're not comparing, like, again, what you're doing is you're saying a country had a more free market system. They developed more socialized medicine, right? These metrics went up. Therefore, it must be the implementation of that thing, despite the fact that time has changed and right, and you're no longer dealing with like variables. You can't use empiricism in economics, right? And you're really just talking about economic variables here.
No, talking about health variables. Health and economics are very, very different.
Right, but you're utilizing the pseudoscience in the same way, which is that you're not comparing the same thing.
What so like if we say penicillin was invented and penicillin cured lots of people from dying in America because it was given for free, socialized without any cost to all of these people. Mm-hmm. And you want to say, well, no, it's the other factors. Well, in America, they just weren't shooting people as much. And therefore the rates of their life expectancy went up, not because of the penicillin. It was because they weren't shooting people. That's p hacking.
It's not p hacking if it's true, but if it's not true, then obviously it is, right? But what the problem is, right, is that let's say you can use penicillin, right? That's an easy one. And that's an easy one that I think you can very clearly prove that like the distribution of penicillin saved lives, right? Like I'll give you that one, right? Because like you have an intervention. This is a specific medical intervention that didn't exist before and now exists. And it is provable in hard science that medical intervention gets rid of, certain diseases and things of that nature, right? So, I mean, that's a very different scenario, right? Than saying what would have occurred if we had a market system that was providing healthcare, and then we have this socialist system in the same amount of time. You would need another world to really know for a fact which one is better. You can make good guesses, right? Which I think is fair to say, like, inductive reasoning, right? It seems to be that this is better, right? Because often when this is implemented, the outcomes get better. Therefore, I assume it to be true. But like, you don't actually know because you're not comparing two things that are exactly the same.
In induction, you can still know things through induction.
That's your answer?
Well, to
like, what?
Well, so what you said there is just factually false. You can still know things by using an induction. It's just a fact in science. So we can use induction and say, if every time a culture implements penicillin or whatever, the life expectancy rises, penicillin causes life expectancy to rise. It's an inductive argument, but if that it's complete, it's knowledge. You can still say it's not. It's justified true belief. So I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's unjustified belief, right? What I'm simply saying is that, like, we never, like, and this is getting like really deep into the philosophy, and like maybe it's just a stupid argument to have here, but I'm just saying you can never really know. You just do the best that you can. You can know something with 99.9% clarity, or 99.9%, or 99.99999%, right? But for all you know, there could be some other factor that we are simply unaware of, right? And so we kind of do the best that we can, and we repeat the study over and over again, and we have a reasonable degree of clarity that that the statement is true.
Right. I mean, I agree. We can't know anything with 100% certainty. But if this analogy is going with, we have a 99% certainty that healthcare, single payer penicillin works, and you're saying, but we could be in the matrix. That's not a good argument here.
No, that's not my whole argument. I'm just making that point clear first, right? So we don't actually, like, just because we have those. Now, the interesting thing is that when you use the penicillin example, right, you use something that can be proven in clinical trials in a laboratory environment, right? You use the example of penicillin, which we know, or we mostly know, right? Like we're pretty fucking certain that penicillin, can be used to cure syphilis, for example, right? And that the world need not worry about syphilis rotting our brains any longer because penicillin was discovered. Fucking hooray, right? But the problem is that degree of certainty goes down the more variables you have, the more difficult it is to be able to test all of these things. And so when you're talking about full systems that involve taxation, that involve GDP, that involve regulations on the market, that involve hundreds of millions of people that have different values, different lives, different cultures, different ways that they interact with healthcare, all of a sudden that degree of certainty is no longer, it's like, it's just like penicillin. When we add penicillin, which we know to be indicates heavily that it cures this disease. That's not the same thing as giant systems, right? Okay, so what I'm getting at?
Yeah. So do we know that offering EpiPens at $30 a pop will save more lives than $300 a pop?
Well, what do you mean? Well, we don't know that, right?
We do.
Because what does it mean by
the data?
No, you don't. No, you don't.
You do.
No, you don't know that.
You do. Like in Mexico, in Mexico they charge $30 per EpiPen. In America, they charge $300 per EpiPen, and we can compare the rate of people who have whatever the diseases are that are associated with that, either whether it's an allergic reaction or diabetes or whatever, and we can say, well, at what rate do they survive more? And they survive more in Mexico. Thank you.
Right. So here's the problem with consequentialism, right? Here's why it's just like you can't use it because it's silly.
Well, how anybody that does it, it's like penicillin case.
No, I'll explain to you. You say offering EpiPen at $300 versus offering EpiPen at $30, right? Now, how do you offer the EpiPen at $30 versus how do you offer the EpiPen at $300? So let's break it down, right? And actually do the full consequentialist analysis, right? Because what you're saying is we did one thing and then we looked at specific outcomes, and those specific outcomes were better. Therefore, this is better. The problem with that is what if the corporation that was selling the EpiPens at $300 puts 20% of their profits into research and development, right? And what if that corporation then discovers the cure to type 1 diabetes? Over time, it is actually morally unjustified from your position to sell the EpiPen at $30 as opposed to selling the EpiPen at $300. Like the analysis that we can, this is why you need to be grounded in axioms of what is right and wrong. And you're not. What you're doing is taking subjective opinions and then using those subjective opinions to get the data or the analysis that you want, without perfect knowledge and then claiming that it's better whilst you don't have perfect knowledge. And because you don't have that perfect knowledge, you're not actually able to tell me anything in those regards.
Well, so if we were actually regularly curing massive diseases that affected millions of people, I would agree. It just doesn't happen. The research doesn't do that.
Well, you can't tell the future, T-Jump. You don't know what will happen.
Well, that's like saying, well, I charge $1 billion for my iPhone or whatever. Oh, you're running out of time.
It says it's going to run out of time in 1 minute.
Yeah, this thing in the site, it'll change later. But so if I
when we run out of time, can we keep going? Because
No, I
this
don't think so.
conversation seems interesting to me.
I think it automatically ends, but it'll figure it out later. But if I charge more for my phone on the off chance I have some awesome discovery and invent the new electricity, until it actually happens, it's just like saying we could be in the Matrix. It's not a rational conclusion to make. It's a bad argument.
No, I think it's perfectly rational to say that you don't have perfect knowledge, right? And that you as an individual, you need to do two things in order to determine what is going to reduce conflict in the world and what is going to make a better, more prosperous society. And first, you must ensure that you're not negating in your morality. And what I mean by that is that you're not doing immoral, unjustifiable actions. And socialized healthcare is that. Okay. And the second thing that I would say is that you must do things that align with your individual values and goals, and you must do so as rationally as possible. And single payer healthcare it is proven that single payer healthcare is not morally justifiable. And you yourself even say that taxation is theft and that it is a form of stealing. And that's the issue, is that you don't have perfect knowledge. When you don't have perfect knowledge and you try and pretend that you know what is better based off of consequences that you can't predict, that it's an absurd position if it also entails morally unjustifiable things, period.
Well, all right. Well, I think we can just don't press the button and just keep going or whatever. But
apparently we can, but it looks horrible.
It does. But
I'll let you say like one final out too, like so I don't get like the final dunk dub or whatever.
No, that's all right. I'm cool with that. I need to get some food anyway. But it was great having you on. Fun conversation. Really appreciate it. You want to give any shout outs to your where people can find you?
I'm Fabian Liberty pretty much everywhere. I'm primarily a Twitch streamer. I happen to be on YouTube tonight because, fuck it. Wednesdays are usually my day off, and I was like, whatever, I'll do a YouTube exclusive. That'll be fun. But yeah, Fabian Liberty pretty much everywhere. I need YouTube subs bad. If you can give me a YouTube sub, because we're at like 6,000 watch hours and still don't have the subs to get monetized. Like, I don't know how that happened. Apparently everyone else has a harder time getting the watch hours, but we didn't. So like, if you want to throw us a sub, please do. I appreciate it.
You gotta contact those Indian guys on LinkedIn. They'll just pay $100 and just give you like 10,000 subs. It's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to do that because that'll hurt growth in the long run, I think.
Well, anyway, my channel is youtube.com/tjump. Please give me money. Join my Patreon. I accept cookies. Thanks.
And tjump_ on Twitter, by the way.
Yes. It's the key feature. It's like a symbol of the chair. It's like the armrest for the chair.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate it. I'm gonna get some dinner, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night.
Hey, you too. I hope you get some good dinner. I'm about to eat some chicken wings.
Cool. Talk to you later.